sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be diving into some pretty big news that came out just a few hours before President Trump's second inauguration.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's an article from Fox News reporting on some pardons that outgoing President Biden issued.
Okay.
And let me tell you, some of the names on this list are pretty surprising.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, are we talking like big names or what?
Yeah, we're talking some big names for sure.
Okay.
So like Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Oh, wow.
Mark Milley.
Mm.
And get this, the article says all members of Congress and their staff who served on the January 6th Select Committee.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it even goes on to say that the U.S. Capitol and D.C. Metro police officers who testified before the committee were also pardoned.
Huh. So what do you think about that? I mean, like, the sheer scope of these pardons is pretty unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not something you see every day, is it? It's pretty unusual to see pardons given to, like, entire groups of people like this.
Right. Usually it's done, on, like, a case-by-case basis, often after, like, a ton of legal review.
Exactly.
So this seems like Biden was trying to make a statement with this, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Maybe he was thinking there would be a bunch of politically motivated investigations under the new Trump administration.
Yeah, it's possible.
And then there's also the fact that some people who you might have expected to be pardoned weren't.
Oh, really? Like who?
Like people who were really involved in investigating Trump during his first term.
Okay.
Like Special Counsel Jack Smith,
Hmm.
former FBI Director Christopher Wray,
Okay.
and Attorney General Merrick Garland.
So all pretty high profile.
Yeah, they were all left out.
Why do you think that is? I mean, it seems kind of strange to pardon some and not others, especially when they might all face scrutiny from the new administration, right?
Yeah, I know that's a really good question.
Like maybe Biden thought these people wouldn't face the same level of like political payback as someone like Dr. Fauci,
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, Dr. Fauci was a pretty frequent target for Trump and his supporters. Or maybe Biden was trying to avoid looking like he was shielding his entire administration from any future investigations.
Yeah, there's a balance to strike, right?
Right.
Between protecting people and making sure everything's still transparent and accountable.
Exactly.
That's a complicated situation.
It is.
Now, the article also talks about how Jen Milley responded to the pardon.
Okay, and what do you say?
Well, he said that he was grateful and that he didn't want to spend his time fighting those who unjustly might seek retribution.
Oh, so he's kind of expecting some legal challenges or investigations then.
That's what it sounds like, right?
Yeah, and it seems like he's seeing this pardon as a way to protect himself and his family from being attacked for political reasons.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does make you think, though, how much power should a president have when it comes to pardons?
Yeah, especially when they're issued right before leaving office.
Right, exactly.
That's a question that'll probably be debated for a while.
Yeah.
Speaking of debate, the article also mentions that there was some pretty immediate pushback from some political figures.
Oh, really? Who?
Like Senator Eric Schmidt.
Okay, what do you say?
He called Biden one of the worst presidents in American history.
Wow, that's pretty harsh.
Yeah, it is. Do you think it's justified?
Well, things are super partisan right now, and these pardons touch on some really divisive issues.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think Schmidt's statement probably just reflects how angry and frustrated a lot of people on the right are feeling towards Biden and what he did.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's dig a little deeper into what Biden's motivation might have been here.
Okay.
So the article points out that Biden had hinted at the possibility of these preemptive pardons weeks before.
Interesting.
It makes it seem like he knew that a new Trump administration might launch a bunch of politically driven investigations.
Yeah, and that brings up a really important question, doesn't it?
What's that?
Were these pardons really meant to protect these people from being unfairly prosecuted? Or was this all just a calculated move to shield his political allies from facing any consequences?
That's a good point. I guess to really understand what's going on, we need to understand more about presidential pardons in general.
Yeah, we should take a look at the history and the legal side of things.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about the history of presidential pardons and how these actions fit into that bigger picture?
Sure. Well, the power to pardon is actually right there in the Constitution. It gives the president the authority to basically forgive federal offenses.
Okay.
And the whole concept is rooted in this idea of mercy, like a way to check the courts if they overreach.
Right.
And throughout history, presidents have used this power in all sorts of ways.
Like what?
Well, like granting clemency to people who have already served their time,
Okay.
or even giving blanket pardons to entire groups,
Mm.
like when President Carter pardoned all those Vietnam War draft dodgers.
Oh, yeah. I remember learning about that in school. So where do Biden's pardons fit into all of this?
These are definitely on the more controversial side,
How so?
mostly because they're preemptive, you know? I mean, there is some precedent for that.
Like what?
Well, the most famous example is probably President Ford pardoning Richard Nixon.
Right, for Watergate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that was a really unique situation.
Yeah, I guess they were trying to, like, heal the country after everything that happened.
Right. Whereas in this case, Biden's pardons could be seen as trying to interfere with potential investigations.
That does make it a lot more complicated.
It does.
So what about the legal side of things? Can these pardons actually protect these people from being investigated or prosecuted in the future?
That's where it gets even more interesting.
Why?
Presidential pardons are really powerful. They can cover federal crimes that have already happened and even crimes that might happen in the future.
So, like, someone could be pardoned for something they haven't even been charged with yet.
Exactly.
Wow. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So even if the new Trump administration wanted to investigate someone like Dr. Fauci, they couldn't bring any federal charges against him.
Nope, that's right.
Wow.
But it's important to remember that presidential pardons only apply to federal offenses.
Okay.
They don't protect anyone from state-level charges.
So there are still some limits.
Exactly. And then you also have to think about the political consequences.
Right.
I mean, even if someone's legally in the clear, a pardon doesn't just make everyone forget what happened.
Sure.
And it doesn't stop Congress from investigating or holding hearings either.
Oh, right, like what happened with the January 6th committee.
Exactly.
So these pardons aren't like a total clean slate. They just offer some legal protection.
Exactly. And that leads us to another important question.
What's that?
How will all of this affect the public's perception? Will people trust our institutions after this?
Right, because we're talking about actions that could potentially undermine the whole idea of accountability and equal justice under the law. So what do you think?
Well, pardons, especially controversial ones, can definitely have a big impact on public trust.
How so?
When a president uses this power in a way that seems politically motivated or self-serving, it can make people lose faith in the system.
Right. It starts to feel like there's one set of rules for the powerful and another set for everyone else.
Exactly. And in today's political climate where people already don't trust institutions as much as they used to, these pardons could make things even worse.
Yeah, they can make people even more cynical, especially those who already feel like the system's rigged against them.
Exactly. And that kind of cynicism can be really dangerous for a democracy.
Right, because if people don't trust their government, it's really hard to get anything done.
Exactly. It's hard to address important issues or find common ground.
So it's really important to have these conversations about how presidential power is used like we're doing right now.
I agree. We need to acknowledge that this is complicated and understand what the consequences could be.
Right. And we also need to talk about how we can prevent these actions from further damaging public trust. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think transparency is key. The more information the public has about why these pardons were given, the better they'll be able to understand and make judgments.
That makes sense.
The Biden administration needs to be ready to explain their reasoning and address any concerns about potential conflicts of interest or political motivations.
So it's not just on the executive branch. Congress has a role to play too, right?
Absolutely. Congress has an important oversight role. They could hold hearings to really dig into the reasons for these pardons and see if there are any legal or ethical issues.
Okay.
And that would give the public a chance to hear both sides and help ensure accountability and transparency.
So we need a system of checks and balances to make sure the pardon power isn't abused.
Exactly.
And the media has a part in this too, right?
Of course, they need to report on these issues fairly and accurately, give people the context and analysis they need to understand what's going on.
So it sounds like it takes all branches of government and the media working together to make sure presidential powers is used responsibly and that the public still trusts the system.
That's right. But it also comes down to each and every one of us as citizens.
What do you mean?
We need to stay informed, ask questions, and hold our leaders accountable for what they do.
So to all of our listeners out there, what are your thoughts on this?
Do you think these pardons were the right thing to do?
How do you think they'll affect public trust and the future of our political landscape?
We want to hear from you. Join the conversation, share your perspectives, and help us all figure out this complicated and ever-changing world of politics.
It's really a lot to think about. And as we've been talking, I keep coming back to this question of Biden's legacy. I mean, how do you think history is going to judge these last-minute pardons?
That's a tough one. Historians will probably be debating this for years.
Yeah.
On one hand, you could see these pardons as like a really brave move, you know? Like he was trying to protect these people from what he saw as basically a political witch hunt.
Right.
But on the other hand, it could also look like a reckless abuse of power.
Yeah.
And it could set a dangerous precedent for future presidents to just shield their friends from any accountability.
So it's kind of like a gamble, isn't it?
It is.
He might be hurting his own legacy by doing this.
Right.
But he's hoping to protect these people and maybe even protect the integrity of the justice system itself.
Yeah, it's a risky move for sure. And it might even backfire.
How so?
Well, the new Trump administration might see this and think, oh, there's something to hide here. And they might go after these people even harder. They might see it as a challenge to their authority.
So what about the people who were pardoned? Will these pardons actually protect them from scrutiny or legal trouble down the road?
Well, like we talked about earlier, they do offer some serious legal protection at the federal level.
Oh, okay.
But it's not like it erases what happened in the public eye.
Right.
These people could still be investigated. They could be called to testify in congressional hearings. They might even get sued in civil court. And there's always a chance they'll be ostracized or demonized by certain groups.
So it's not a free pass.
Nope. It's more like a shield that offers some protection, but doesn't make them totally immune to the consequences of their actions.
Right. And that's a really important point for everyone listening.
Yeah, just because someone's pardoned doesn't mean they're innocent.
Right.
It just means that they've been forgiven for those actions, at least by the federal government.
So what does all of this mean for the American people? What message do these pardons send?
That's a good question, and I think it really depends on who you ask. Some people might see this as a sign of compassion. You know,
Okay.
like Biden was willing to stand up for people who were being targeted unfairly.
Okay.
But other people might see it as a way to cheat justice, as a way for powerful people to avoid being held accountable.
And that brings us back to that whole question of trust, doesn't it?
Yeah.
These pardons really highlight how fragile trust is in our institutions and how divided our society is.
Exactly. And honestly, that's probably the most worrying part of this whole thing.
Why?
If we can't agree on what's true or trust that our institutions are working fairly, it's going to be incredibly hard to tackle the problems we're facing as a country.
So where do we go from here? How do we rebuild trust and make sure justice is served?
Well, I think it starts with having open and honest conversations like the one we're having right now.
Okay.
We have to be willing to listen to each other even when we disagree.
Right.
And we need to demand transparency and accountability from our leaders no matter what political party they belong to.
And we as citizens have to stay informed and involved.
Right. We have to think critically, question what we hear, and actively participate in our democracy.
Because the future of our country depends on it.
It does.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into these controversial pardons.
It has.
It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking conversation.
It really has.
We've talked about the power of the president, the importance of trust, and what it means to be an engaged citizen.
I hope this episode has given you some things to think about and inspired you to keep learning about these issues.
Remember, knowledge is power, and your voice matters. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all